Welcome to the Joyosity Podcast. I'm so glad that you are joining us. Whether you are a seasoned leader or just starting out, you belong in the Joyosity community. If you're new to the Joyosity Podcast, we base our work on 3 bedrock beliefs. True leadership requires more than just surface level strategies. It requires a profound connection to everything that makes us human. Using genuine curiosity, we can create positive culture with complex people because here's the thing, complex people is all we got to work with. And number 3, joy is the heartbeat of a healthy leader and a healthy organization. So we're putting joy and fun and play right in the center of our work. And every week on Joyosity, we bring you dynamic conversations with experts and leaders and sharing more than just a couple of tips to help you lead well. We're building a movement with you based on hard-won wisdom, real-life experiences, and leading research. If you're new to me, I'm Jen Whitmer, international speaker and leadership consultant and all-around joy bringer, hosting you and guiding us along. And together, we're going to move from ideas to action and embracing the challenges that come with leading in a dynamic and ever-changing world. So be ready for that I can use this right now tool and a gasp and gut punch deep insight that will transform you as a person and your life as a leader. So get yourself ready. I've got multiple beverages. Grab yours. Get your speakers and headphones connected, maybe some Post-it so you can capture that quote you want to, because we are starting off this season with a dynamic, amazing, and mentor from afar for me, author and keynote speaker. Her name is Kindra Hall. She is a 3-time best-selling author. She is a renowned, sought-after keynote speaker and really a lovely human. We were talking just before we hopped on that I have a story about Kindra. So I think I might share it later on because I want to get to interviewing her about her amazing power of the stories that leaders have and the stories that leaders tell. We're talking about her new book called The Story Edge. And so let's welcome Kindra.
Yay, Jen, I just love you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you. And I just, even at like all the bedrocks that you have for what this Joyosity podcast is, I'm so on board. So an honor. Thanks for having me.
I love it. Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so excited for you to be our season opener. You're returning I think this is the 3rd or 4th iteration of the podcast.
Yes,
so we're as further along the path. And I'm so grateful for it. And I cannot wait for the listeners to really hear about just so much of your expertise and real experience. So I always like, as we're starting to connect as humans, give us a little bit of how you got here, what a keynote speaker is, we all know what an author is. Here's my little Kindra book stack if you've not gotten her books. What is a consultant? What do we do when we're running around the world like this? How did we get here? And what is a storytelling expert is? So give us the deal. How did you get here?
Oh, it's a long story, Jen. We have. And I will say, once I started writing books, I felt a sense of relief because now when somebody, casually is like, oh, what do you do? It's so much easier to say, I'm an author, and I give presentations about my books than it is to say, oh, I'm a keynote speaker. So that just was a motivating force to write a book just in and of itself. But it's true. My expertise is in the power of storytelling, and most specifically in business, whether it's sales and marketing, leadership, just better communication all around. So as a keynote speaker, I travel across the country, and now I really can say across the globe. I just came back from Portugal. I'm headed off to Korea and Singapore in about a month, which is really exciting to be able to bring the message far and wide. But I get anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes on a stage in front of anywhere from 100 to 15,000 people to be able to share with them the importance of their story. And I often joke when I get up on stage and I say, hey, when you hear my title is professional storyteller, if you're thinking to yourself, that sounds made up, it is. So I guess to answer the question of how I got here, I'm a firm believer that, where sometimes the job finds you. And whether it's really a matter of like how quickly you realize that, oh, this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing. So I told my first story when I was 11. And even in that moment, I had to tell a story to a classroom full of third graders. And it was at the end of the day. So it's just pure chaos. And I remember I started telling the story, and it took just a few sentences, and I held them right there in the palm of my hand. And I remember thinking, I can picture the classroom and everything, thinking, hold on a second, like maybe there's something to this. If I want people to listen, all I have to do is tell a story. And then through a series of fortunate events, I ended up entering here's a funny story that not many people know. I ended up entering a national storytelling competition my senior year of high school. And the reason I entered the competition was because my mom kept bothering me to write scholarship applications for college. Like scholarships were going to be the only way that we could afford college. So she was just on me day in, day out. Have you written your scholarship? You got to write some essays. You got to do this. And I was so annoyed that I decided to rebel. And this is me. This is how rebellious I am. And a teacher actually had given me a flyer after, I'm a senior in high school. I've been telling stories now since 5th grade, that there was a storytelling competition and I should enter it. So behind my mother's back, I went into our school auditorium. I had somebody come in and film me on VHS cassette tape. I managed to package it up and send it into the competition. But what really happened there is when you go to the storytelling competition, and I won, the grand prize is you're invited to tell a story at the National Storytelling Festival. It's not a scholarship, so my mother was disappointed about that. But I ended up going to this National Storytelling Festival. It still happens the first weekend in October in Jonesboro, Tennessee. And I was telling as one of the youth tellers, but at that event, there are, I would say, about 20 storytellers they're not business storytellers. They're just telling from all different cultures and all different backgrounds. Some of the tellers are registered national treasures by the Smithsonian Museum. It is. And so sitting there at that event, my mom came with me. Again, I'm watching all these people be captivated by a storyteller on a stage that's just telling a simple moment from their life. But in the retelling of it, there was so much meaning and so much perspective and so much togetherness and, quite frankly, joy that came from that. And I remember we were in the shuttle heading back to the airport, my mom and I, and she said, you could do this. You could be a storyteller. And me, I was like, what? I'm just going to tell stories for the rest of my life? What kind of job is that?
Here we are a couple decades later.
Exactly.
Maybe there was something to it.
Exactly. So that was really how I got started and I think it's important because now storytelling, particularly in business, has become such a buzzword, and people are talking about it, from a marketing perspective, and what's your story, and find your brand story. And so people assume that me talking about storytelling, I come from a marketing background, which, yes, eventually I was in marketing, but it started with the simple, traditional, classic telling of stories to bring people together. And then it went from there through all of my education. Any opportunity I got, if there was an independent project or my master's thesis was on the role of storytelling in organizations. When I went out to get a job in sales and marketing, I realized all we're doing is telling stories, at least when we're our best. That's what we're doing. And then I decided, clearly people are missing this. They don't know what this is. They'd be so much better if they knew what it was. And despite, not always wanting my mom to be right, it turned out that's the job I'm supposed to have, is to help people recognize the value of their stories.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And I always love hearing how people got to where they are for multiple reasons. One is I do really believe we connect as humans. And one of my coaches and mentors says the shortest distance between two people is a story.
Yep.
And so I love the us connecting and seeing your expertise played out over our lives. And one of the things I often do to help my own clients in their leadership is you've probably already been doing it. And so you have been, and usually when my guests tell a story, you see that they've been doing it. Like
Yeah.
there is something about who you are and the way you have lived your life that is a benefit to other people in your work.
Yeah.
And that's a really important connection. So I'm going to tell a really quick story and then I'm going to ask you something. So when we were in the depths of 2020, like just, I know that can be a little hard for people to go back to for a moment. And you in New York, I here in St. Louis, we were not just free to roam all over the places. The gym was not really open. There wasn't things. And I was trapped in my house with the six of us. Luckily, we have a large enough house, but there was still a lot of bodies. Everybody was in high school at the time, except for one who was in elementary school. So they're adult-sized bodies all together. And I was struggling with my own like health and like, how do I go move in ways that were helpful? And on Instagram, I watched you on your rooftop in New York, spin in the cold and create an ice rink out there. And I was just like, I can go do that too. I can throw on I call it my sleeping bag coat and zip it up with its fuzzy hood and put on 2 pairs of leggings in a St. Louis winter. If you can in a New York winter, where these are both very cold places in the winter, not quite as cold as Minnesota, but and go out and move. And I have now, I think I'm at day 100 or 810 in a row of closing all of my rings on my Apple Watch. So it started before, but the consistency started from watching you tell your story. And so I just think there's power in a story to share as a leader, because that was a leadership moment. Even though you weren't thinking of it as a leadership moment. And we have to lead ourselves first before we can lead other people. And that was an example of that story. So I'm telling that because there's so much power in the connection of people as a leader, because leaders, it's all about relationships and connecting with others. So I'd love for you to define for us, because sometimes when we say story, we think it has to totally be personal, or like my grandma Delario used to say, are you telling me a story? Which meant I was kidding. So like, would you give us your definition of a story? What is story?
Wow, that is,
I know it's a big question.
I know I should have like written it down. Well, I do think that, when I'm talking about story, I'm talking about true stories, right? And it's not like, oh, are you telling me are you lying to me? I think a story is it's a noun. It's a thing. It's that has the ability to transport people from where they are physically to a different place, in their mind, in their heart, in their spirit. And of course, there are strategies and tactics in order to make that happen. But when you're experiencing, and we've all been on the receiving end of a story when someone's telling it, and you're hearing it, yes, as an outside person, but you are also sitting right there in that moment, like hovering over the person who's telling the story as they're experiencing it. And as a result, I call that kind of the co-creative process. It blurs the lines between you and me, and we create these shared spaces where humans really do connect in familiar experiences, whether maybe the experience is completely foreign. Maybe you've never sat at the storytelling festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, but the emotion in that moment, even the details of being a rebellious teenager.
You were so rebellious.
I was. My parents had it really, really tough. So, and in that way, I think a story also is something that has the ability to to administer meaning without the limitations of defining it, right? There's an openness to it where the recipient of the story can create their own connective tissues to what it means and what it can mean in their life.
Absolutely. I work a lot with stories in my model, in the Joyosity model. It's a key part of exploring who we are, but it also comes back again in communication, in engagement skills, and how we engage with other people. So one of the things that I find so fascinating when I study stories, I've learned a lot from you. In this book, we talk, and you've talked a lot about, in your first book, Stories That Stick.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep doing it. You talk a lot. I'm just going to like all around.
I don't even have a copy. I don't have a copy anyway. So good. I'm glad that you're showing up.
They usually sit right back there, but I had to pull them up here so I could show people. So when you're talking about the power of a story, sometimes I think I always call them the critic in the back. They're like, I don't need that personal story. I don't need that story about that. Talk to us a little bit about the power of persuasion of a story. Like, why does a story work better than just a cold, hard fact?
Well, I mean, there's so many reasons. And I think first and foremost, and I say this a lot, and it's really important for people to understand, and we talk about this in the Story Edge, is that fundamentally, as part of our biology, our DNA, what we are as humans, like just as an armadillo has an exoskeleton, right? Did I get that right? We use stories.
Yes.
Right. That is what, when anthropologists go back and study, what was it that made the human species the dominant species? And it was we weren't necessarily the biggest, we weren't necessarily the fastest, but we were able to come together collectively and through stories share experiences of what we had learned so that people don't do it again if we made a mistake. We were able to, through stories, describe and articulate concepts that weren't physical and right there in front of us. So we were able to organize, we were able to work together. So this is, and it's fascinating to me because I also feel like our ability to tell stories is the whole reason that we don't think we need it, right? I don't need the personal story because we can actually think about a story because we are storytellers. So you don't see the scorpion being like, I don't think I'm going to use my poison. Like, right? Like this isn't. And so you don't see a zebra saying, I'm not really into my stripes. It's so that's the same thing when a human says, I'm not really going to tell a story. I don't need to do that. I have my facts. I have my logic. And on the receiving end, to be like, a story isn't going to work on me. That's like the frog saying, the scorpion's poison isn't going to affect me. Like this is how we're built. This is what it is. So that is part of it. And then as a result of it being a part of our DNA, there are triggers within the human body that a story lights up, right? This is, and there's the research that says that we release cortisol, which has us focus and pay attention. We release oxytocin, which is why the distance between two people is just one story. And what's really fascinating for me in my work as a speaker is I get to watch this happen real time on stage. People think that they don't need to hear a story. I mean, the number of times I've had someone come up to me afterwards and say, I saw this on the agenda and didn't really think it was going to be for me, which fine, like I'm up for the challenge. Let's see what happens. But I always open with a story, and I can tell in the moment, there's a moment while I'm telling the story that there are some people, the skeptics, who are like, what's this about? What's going on here? And then, because I know what I'm doing, I later come back to the story and say, hey, do you remember when I was telling you that story? How many of you were sitting in that room right there with me? And you can see them all go, because that is simply what it means to be a human. That is just what it is. So yes, you have to be respectful. You can't be telling a story just for the fun of it. If you're in a super high stakes sales pitch, you need to be prepared. You need to be ready. But to say, as a listener, I don't need a story. Can you still hear me okay? Because I just realized my microphone died. Yeah?
You're fine.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that you don't need it is basically to say I'm not human. And
Exactly.
I mean, as far as I can tell, most people still are humans.
Yeah, we're not really working with robots as much as
in some ways.
we
You can tell
are.
what it's, yeah, exactly. They're not walking around.
Yeah, and like even the robots need some support in telling a story, I think. At least whenever AI comes up, I'm always like, yeah, but somebody has to tell it what to do.
Exactly.
And we are these meaning-making creatures. Like we think in narrative form. It is how we are wired, as you said. And I think when I was going through your book again, because I've read it a couple times now, and then preparing again, one of my favorite parts that you talk about is the power of a story in business. And one specific story you were talking about was doctors and medical training. So I want my doctor, please have all of the training to know what medicine, where to cut, like all of those things. I want a highly skilled doctor in the science and the medicine of practicing medicine. But I have had some really awful experiences with doctors who don't have, as you say, they're not a story forward leader. And there was a research study that you shared about the power of story in medical training. So talk to us a little bit about, tell that story, but why stories matter in business. Like what is the business case for telling a good story? Not like just one that makes people chuckle, but a really strategic story around advancing change, creating a new project, or any other purpose in leadership. Why a story?
Well, I'm not surprised that you brought that up because I know you and I share the same love for like fun research articles. The number of research articles that I read in preparation for the Story Edge, it was vast and many. But the study that you're talking about here, which yes, they used it in training for a medical profession, which yes, to your question earlier, to have the facts, to have the details, you want a very skilled physician. But the case that they were making in this research study is there is another side to being an excellent physician, and the importance of being able to raise excellent physicians that goes beyond just the standard skills and procedures that they have to be very well versed in. And ultimately what the article was saying is that and this is true, so they're talking about it in a medical sense, but this is true for any leader in business, is there are other aspects of that job, of any job, that are really difficult to navigate, that aren't going to be in the textbooks, that are nuanced, that ultimately only come with experience. But if you wait for, in this case, young physicians in training, or young up and coming employees, potential leaders in your organizations, if you wait for them to have that experience, you could lose them. They could make mistakes that are unnecessary. And so the discussion at the end of that research article, one of the takeaways was to training physicians to also take the time to tell stories of these other challenging aspects of the medical profession. And that is, patients, and we could simplify it as bedside manner, but it could be like that patient relationship. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the other category of story was, but they both, or specific story, but they both fell under the category of the bigger challenges that physicians will face. And so to expand that one step further, one of the uses for storytelling in organizations as a leader is and this is an exercise that you could do, is sit down and take a moment and think about what are going to be the hardest, maybe unexpected, hardest things about this job. Is it the amount of hours you're going to be traveling and the strain that can take on a family? Is it going to be maybe it's the interaction with customers or patients or whatever it is? Maybe I know that it can be really frustrating if you're in the sales department and you're always working with the legal department or you're working with the numbers people, right? But a leader's ability to tell those stories as part of the indoctrination, as part of the orientation into the culture, will serve them so much better, because now the new person or the emerging leader it's almost like building scaffolding for them. They can say, okay, I can hang this story on that. I can hang. And so when they encounter it, they can say, they told me this would be the case. And they have a story to guide them.
Yeah. And it's so much more memorable.
Oh,
like
yeah.
I mean, you know this, when you stand on stage and you tell a story, you can see the people kind of move forward, and you know that as a former educator and then someone who also loves stories, I know literally they're building brain cells.
Yes.
Like that's what's happening. Not only is the attunement and connection between us happening, but it is this building of brain cells and new neural pathways that create the memory. So they actually remember things better. And so when we get to that, it's like, oh, I remember someone told me that, versus a list of things. Like, right. It's like when we say it like that, you're like, oh yeah, I get it. But then I feel like there's just this pull to know I have to give them the bullet points facts. And while those are, again, important, they don't exist in a vacuum. The story is what tells us where they belong.
And why they matter.
That's what's so powerful and why it matters. So, okay.
Go ahead. Well, so in a keynote setting, I often have them audiences do an exercise, whether it's 50 people or just as last weekend, it was 5,000 people, where we compare two messages side by side. I have them each have a partner. They talk about something. They talk about like the facts, that kind of like the standard communication that you would expect. It's fine. The whole room does it. It's great. And then I have them tell a story. And it's a really simple story. It's one that, they can come up with. I'm not telling them to be great storytellers, but just tell a story the kind of story anyone could tell. And the physical movement in the room between the two is drastically different. Like you said, they're leaning in, they're leaning out there. You can see it happen before your very eyes. It's fascinating and thrilling.
It's so powerful. It's so powerful. Okay. So we're going to pause our conversation for now, and we're going to come back for part 2 in just a moment. So please come back next week, because I know that now you're like, okay, I get it. We've kind of told you that stories are important. We're going to come back and talk about why. We're going to talk about why they're so important. So we will see you next week. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at Jen with 2 N's at jenwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.